Good morning. Thank you, Jay, for being here this morning. Jay's a little grumpy today. I don't know. It's Monday, I know, Jay, but you're going to have to bear with us here. We're still glad you're here. We should always be a little grumpy because this is it feels like this is going on forever, and we have a little ways to go here. But regardless, we're going to start with the numbers today. So we have 535 positive cases in Hamilton County for COVID-19. 112 of those individuals have been hospitalized, and our death count has risen to 18 as of this morning. These are all by way of the health commissioner this morning. The Delta, between last time we were here, which was Friday, remember, so we've had a little bit of a lag. So the Delta on those that are testing positive is 62, those hospitalized is 13, and those that have passed away is 4. So we are still on the upward side of the curve, but I must say that it has slowed a little bit by way of the projections. So it's a good news, bad news story this morning. But what we know is that the social distancing is slowing the numbers and flattening the curve. And so again, thank you to all of you for doing what you're doing, whether it's washing your hands constantly. My hands are very dry, a lot of lotion being used nowadays, wearing a mask when you're out and about, or simply keeping your distance. Thank you for all that you're doing. As many of you know, these social distancing efforts come with a hard price and hard side effects. Many businesses, large and small, as well as individuals and families, have seen drastic income losses. Hamilton County is not immune to these same forces, and we are expecting significant revenue reductions this year, mostly by way of sales tax reductions, a reduction in fees. We know that there are huge reductions from casino revenue, and more. So these forces are working against us here in Hamilton County. We have asked departments for plans to make significant cuts, and many of those departments will begin implementing those cuts this week. We are not adopting a one-size-fits-all approach, and we're working with departments on individualized approaches. We will also be implementing this in phases. So as we've said before, we believe department heads and the elected officials over some of these county departments have a better sense of how best they can reach a 20% reduction than we do. And so we have taken their ideas. Jeff Aludo, who will be with us in a second, county administrator, and the budget office have put all that information together, and we're going to see those impacts rolling out here shortly. Unfortunately, when personnel makes up such a significant portion of the budget, there is a real human cost to these cuts. Several county employees will be notified that they will be on furlough soon. I would like to speak to those and all of our employees for a moment, because nothing about this is fair. This has nothing to do with your job performance. Our employees have served through years of budget constraints and have gone without pay raises and faced furloughs in the past. This was supposed to be the year when the budget stress was lifted, and we worked really hard to make sure that this year, starting April of 2020, we would finally get some budget relief, and the coronavirus hit, and now we're in a difficult situation again. I regret that you have to go through this again. We are fighting to minimize the impact of these cuts on you, and we would not be taking these steps if it were not necessary as a last resort. In addition to furloughs, departments will also be using restricted funds. We will look into using the county's reserve. We will redeploy employees into different functions outside of the general fund. And in addition to that, as we have noted in the past, we are lobbying hard at the federal level to either provide some flexibility for the dollars that have been allocated And remember that we talked about this a week or two ago. There is no flexibility with those dollars as it relates to the county general fund and our employees. And so without that flexibility, we do have some resource coming down to respond to the COVID-19 emergency, but those dollars cannot be used to, help us here with the difficulty with the employees. There is another bill coming at the federal level, and so I personally have reached out to Senators Portman and Brown, to Representatives Shabbat and Wenstrup, to make sure that they understand these dynamics, and as they contemplate how that bill rolls out and what those dollars can be used for, just like all of the other counties and local governments in the state of Ohio and throughout the country, we are also advocating that those dollars can be used to shore up the county workforce to make sure that we can do the work that we've been doing at the county level for the constituents of the county. The county commissioner and all 3 county commissioners will be taking 10% pay cuts. And so to go into some detail, we have back the county administrator, Jeff Aludo, and he is going to elaborate when it comes to some of this work. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Commissioner Dreihaus. And I just wanted to take a moment to go into a little bit more detail on some of the items that Commissioner Dreihaus touched on. Before I do that, though, I do just want to thank and to continue to thank all the employees and departments of Hamilton County who continue to do such a great job and a creative job in providing service to the public over this period of time. We've seen the economy largely shut down, but in many instances, the needs of the public and the public service that has to happen to support our community doesn't stop, whether that is in the public safety field, whether that is in social services, whether it's the work of our of providing elections and managing elections, even the work of supporting our local construction industry as that industry continues onward, the work of inspections and permitting and that type of thing, the work of our utilities. So not even just under the county, but all local governments, whether it's county, city, township, that are doing work on behalf of the public. I just wanted to continue to thank all of those entities and all of those individuals. Commissioner Dreihaus did ask that I provide a short briefing on what we're seeing as far as revenue impacts and the status of county budget planning efforts. As we discussed previously, we were looking at an overall budget reduction of close to 20% this year due to the COVID-19 crisis, amounting to between $40 and $60 million in county revenues. We're starting to see those numbers materialize at this point, although it's going to take a little bit more time before we see the full impact. As I mentioned last time I was on, we kind of compare this to the trend that has been shown on the health curve as well, that you saw a gradual ramp up in terms of how many cases were being reported. We're going to see the same thing as it relates to revenue impacts, but we are starting to get some data now to confirm what we knew was going to be a significant reduction in county revenues. We know that the state saw a close to 10% reduction in sales tax from late February into early March. That predates the larger economic shutdown that we've seen and the broader stay-at-home order. So we're fairly confident that we're going to see a much larger sales tax reduction in the months to come, and we have projected being down significantly, as much as by 70% in certain months before we start to see an increase in those numbers towards the third quarter. Our casino revenues were off by 60% in March, or approximately $300,000. And again, that accounts for only a portion of the time that where casinos were then asked to shut down. So we anticipate that number dropping to close to zero in some of our future months. And we've also started to see some of the activity of our property transfer fees start to point downward as well. So again, while we have a lot more information to come, and as sales tax numbers start to roll in, we will get a lot better understanding of the revenue dynamic. But unfortunately, as we've discussed before, sales tax is 3 months in arrears for counties, so we won't know precisely whether our estimates are dead on, whether they're high, whether they're low, until the problem is 3 months behind us, unfortunately. So all of that being said, we have to make sure we are being forward-leaning and taking actions we can take proactively now to deal with the revenue crisis that we know is going to be there. We do, as Commissioner Dreihaus said, we do continue to work with departments and agencies on an approach to addressing the shortfall, and we should have a plan developed for departments under the Board of County Commissioners by later on this week. And I think you'll also start to see various elected offices coming out with and implementing plans over the next several weeks as well. So while I'm not going to go into any one department plan at this point, with maybe one exception, there are some, here are some of the types of things that you'll see. So first and foremost, new programs and initiatives under the Board of County Commissioners in the 2020 budget will largely be discontinued or eliminated. For example, the county had planned on an economic development fund that had been long requested by many of our first-ring suburbs to help them with revitalization and infrastructure efforts. That was planned at roughly $1.5 to $2 million this year. That program will be discontinued in 2020. County facilities will be pulling back on several $1 million worth of critical capital expenditures this year. Our planning department will be redeploying staff into restricted fund activities to save several $100,000 of expenses. Assigned counsel costs through the public defender's office will be reduced given the lack of court activity, so they'll be able to pull back on some of those costs. Ultimately, there won't be a one-size-fits-all approach, as Commissioner Dreihaus had indicated. You're going to see non-personnel reductions. You're going to see furloughs. You're going to see work week reductions. But again, it's going to be tailored depending upon the need of the public, and it's going to be tailored depending upon the ability of that department. So I was just informed actually several minutes ago about the action of our domestic relations court, which has just announced the furloughing of 35 of their employees for a 2-week period. So we're going to we're in close contact with all these departments, and we're going to be hearing about these plans implemented as we go through the week and into next week. And before I go any further, as Commissioner Dreihaus said, I do want to thank all the departments and the leadership of our departments for the work that they're doing to take this crisis seriously. To a T, they've all been extremely cooperative in working with the Board of County Commissioners on doing the heavy rowing to implement these plans. And more so than that, again, as echoing Commissioner Dreihaus, I want to thank all the employees who are continuing to do work and those that are sacrificing right now in order to ensure that the county is able to weather this storm financially. They're truly the ones that are bearing the cost of this on a day-to-day basis with their families and financially. And so I do want to indicate to those employees that, again, our hope and our expectation is that this crisis is temporary and that we can ultimately implement strategies that are not permanent in nature, but that we can ultimately pull back on as we start to see things improve later on this year. And to that extent, I do want to say that is the advice and the guidance that we have given departments, is to try to be as creative as possible in implementing solutions that can be either extended or pulled back on as we need to, as we see how this crisis continues to develop financially. We don't want to see departments do things that are in the long run devastating to the operations of a department and to the service of the public if we can do something that is more temporary in nature. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Dreihaus and be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Jeff. And once again, bears repeating that we have been trying really hard at the county administration level to provide a budget for the county that responds to the needs of the constituents. And in this moment in time, or just a month ago, was pretty forward thinking. Economic development dollars, we were going to start to take care of some of the major capital costs that have been deferred for many years. We were trying really hard to make sure that the workforce was provided some stability when it comes to their wages and to benefits. And so this is just so frustrating, and thank you to the county employees for hanging in there. We're going to get through this. This is a temporary dip, but thank you for all the work that you've continued to do. Many of you are working from home, still providing services that are necessary to be provided by the county. So thank you again for doing what you do and helping us weather the storm here. So, Bridget, with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. First up, we have Chris Wederick from the Business Courier. His question is for Administrator Jeff Aludo.
Can you guys tell me a little bit more about what the total number is in terms of cuts that you have to make, and as well as the number of furloughs that we're talking about here going forward? Do you have any idea what those will be?
Thanks, Chris. So first of all, last question first, number of furloughs. We just aren't sure at this point. Again, it is going to depend upon on an individual department by department basis. We are, again, as I indicated, we're encouraging wherever possible departments to use whether it's hiring freezes, reduction in non-personnel expenditures, et cetera. First, there are some departments that just can't do that. So we don't know a total number yet in terms of things like personnel furloughs. In terms of the total number that we're trying to reach, we are still projecting between $40 and $60 million. We don't typically like to project in that much of a range, but unfortunately that's just where we are with this particular crisis. So so again, we're going to be looking to do this on a department by department basis. It's not going to be one size fits all, but that's in terms of the number. And there might have been a third question in there, Chris. What did I miss?
You didn't miss anything, but I do have a follow-up. So the $40 to $60 million range, is that for just the board-controlled departments, or does that include the elected officials that you don't have control over?
Is across the entire county, so that is not just under the Board of County Commissioners. That's across the entire county, the entire county general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question comes from Sherry Coolidge with the Inquirer, and it's for you, Mr. Administrator.
I have to unmute, sorry. It takes me back to covering the county a little bit ago, I think. What is the operating budget right now? And my follow-up question to what Chris was asking is, what happens if the elected officials don't come back with the needed amount of cuts?
Sure. So the operating budget for this year was just north of $270 million. And to your second question, I don't even know that it's a question that is necessarily focused on just elected offices. I have heard from multiple offices, both under the board and under and outside of departments struggling heavily to make a 20% reduction without doing things that they feel might be long-term devastating to the operations of the department. So we are taking a look. We're going to take a look individually at those offices, and where we can, and as I said a little bit earlier, where we can, we're going to be trying to take this one step at a time. Typically, when we look to balance a budget, we look to balance it on an annual basis. This crisis is stretching us in all sorts of different directions. We're going to have to look at this on a very incremental basis, and we're going to have to implement strategies that are short-term in nature, that have the ability to be extended where they can, or pulled back upon, depending upon what the need is. So I can say, Sherry, that at this point, every department we've talked to, board and non-board alike, is working with us towards this. But I do think that ultimately we're going to be looking at, and Commissioner Dreihaus alluded to this, we're going to be looking at several different categories of how we're going to make this work. There's going to be department reductions. There are going to be there's going to be some element of general fund reserve support to make this work. There's going to, we're hoping for some some federal aid as well to help make this work. And this has got to be an all hands on deck approach. And we're telling that to the departments that look, if we can get as far as we can with reductions, if we need to pick up something from the general fund reserve, we'll look at that as well. So, but I would imagine, as I said, that question is not just for non-board departments. It's going to be a struggle across the entire general fund.
Administrator Aludo, we have another question. It's from Jay Hanselman with WVXU.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there you go. Jeff, can you hear me? I'm sorry. Just a real quick question first, and I have a follow-up to that. What is the total reserve number right now?
We have currently, we ended 2019 at north of 30 million. I think it was somewhere between 30 and 36 million in our general fund reserve, which is just about where we wanted it to be, close to the 15% number of the general fund. We were not quite there yet, but we were just getting to the point where we wanted it to be. Now we may be talking about a drawdown on that, but that's where we ended 2019, Jay.
And then I think you mentioned this last week, you said it again this morning, that your sales tax numbers are about 3 months behind. So how do you budget if the numbers are going to be coming in late? If recovery happens in the third and fourth quarter, you're not going to know that right away. So do you just plan on these cuts and then maybe hope for the best that the numbers come in better than what you're expecting?
Yeah, so I think we'll be able to tailor things a little bit based upon what our projection was. For when we do start to see the numbers come in, we can hopefully at that point start to modify our future projections based upon the accuracy that we see in those first months. But we were projecting, as I may have indicated, down anywhere from 70% in the early months on this, then ramping back up to down 50%, 40, and 30, and largely recovering by the end of this year, early next year. So we're still hoping for that to be the case, but that we're learning new things about this crisis every week. So, but we do still hope that to be the case.
And I'm sorry, just one other real quick thing. I know the city said that when they were planning for their budget adjustments, that they were planning on this ending in June. Is that the county's take, or what are you using for an end date?
Yeah, so I don't know that we have a specific end date targeted, but we are showing in most of our models a gradual ramp up and recovery through the end of the year. And again, I think it's all going to depend. Commissioner Dreihaus talked about the federal stimulus bill, and while we're certainly hoping for some assistance to help local government in those bills, we're also hoping that those stimulus and recovery plans help give the public a sense of confidence on the public health perspective, because at the end of the day, from the county's perspective, especially being an entity that's so tightly knit to sales tax, we will not recover until people again feel safe going out into the community and shopping at shopping malls, going out to eat at restaurants, et cetera. So a lot of it's going to depend upon how not only the recovery happens, but as how the general economy recovers. And that's just not something we are completely certain of yet, Jay.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Marielle Carbone with WCPO for you, Administrator.
Yeah, good morning. Just a quick question for the furloughs. I know you don't have exact numbers yet on how many people will be affected, but on the city side, they offer those couple options for furloughed staff to take, whether it's using their PTO and vacation time or doing the emergency leave. Are you guys giving any options like that for these employees?
So we're still in the planning stages on this, Muriel. But at this point, counties are fairly limited in what they can do from a furlough perspective, depending upon whether it's an exempt or non-exempt employee. So we're going to try to be as flexible as we can But from our perspective right now, that really is pushing us more towards implementing furloughs as opposed to doing layoffs that are much more permanent in nature, much harder to reverse, and also come with additional costs and complicated processes that we would have to implement. Wherever possible, we want to do this in a way that's flexible, that we can implement it and pull it back very quickly if we need to, or unfortunately, if we need to, extend on it as well. So.
Yeah, and you said 2 weeks is what you're looking at right now. Do you think 2 weeks would actually be enough for those furloughs?
Authority to do things on furloughs, again, will depend upon whether it is an exempt or non-exempt employee. So without getting too much into the detail there, will it be enough? At this point in time, I can't answer that question. I think, again, we're going to be trying to take this incrementally, one step at a time. What's the minimal we can do right now? And if we need to extend on that, we'll extend on it. If we can pull it back, we will. So we're hoping that especially as it relates to the impacts of employees, we can defer capital for another year. We can put off programming for another year, but the impacts to our employees is really what we're concerned with right now. We want to make sure that we're implementing that in the most sensitive way possible, with the ability to pull it back if we can, as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next up, Todd Dykes with WLWT has a couple questions for you.
Touched on this already. This conversation can get a little dense for somebody like me, a layperson. But from a timing standpoint, with regard to furloughs, for workers who are watching this at home and wondering when they might know something, what does that look like? And I assume it's tied to the sales tax delay, but is there a drop dead date that everybody would know whether they're going to be furloughed or not?
I don't think that there is a drop dead date on this, Todd. I think we're going to, and again, it's going to be on a very department by department basis. And if we have departments that are able to implement measures initially that allow them to avoid measures with more direct personnel impacts, and we're going to ask that they do that. If we have, the nature of county government is that a lot of our costs are wrapped up in personnel, and so we know, and as we've already seen, we have some departments that can't make a reduction work anywhere but on the backs of employees, unfortunately. So again, no drop dead date, but we're trying to ask departments to be as creative and flexible as they can, and we will take this one step at a time.
That sounds good. And also, Jeff, obviously a great concern about public safety in the county, and I'm curious to know what kind of dialogues you're having with the Sheriff's Department. I know last week, or a week and a half ago when we were last talking, said the dialogues have been very good and productive and so forth, and everybody's pretty much on the same page. What does it look like from the Sheriff's Department, and any cuts to deputies being proposed at this point, or furloughs rather, or where does that stand?
Sure. So I'm not prepared to talk about that at this point. I just don't have the information, Todd. But I can tell you that, as it relates to the sheriff's operation, you're really talking about two large operations, the operation of the jail and sheriff patrols. And part of this from the sheriff patrol perspective is going to relate to how this crisis hits some of our individual communities that contract with the sheriff for patrol. So we're going to see this likely materialize over the course of the next several weeks to several months, and we'll have to make a decision at that point in terms of how that impacts our patrol operation. The jail, as I'm sure you've heard, is down. I think as of this morning, there were around 805 inmates. We were closer to 1,300 just a month or two ago. And that in and of itself is a radical shift in terms of where we have been in this county, again, just weeks and months ago. And I can say that the sheriff has been very cooperative on this, so we're going to continue to work with him on his strategy to get at a number. At the same time, the health impact of this crisis is also constraining our ability to do certain things. For instance, the number of inmates that we currently have in the Justice Center might in another environment allow us to reduce the number of floors or even the number of towers that we're operating at the Justice Center. Unfortunately, we need to distance those inmates So we have to put inmates into different cells. We can't have them all, we can't be double selling as much as we were in the past. So that in and of itself is going to mean that we can't take advantage of the operational savings that we otherwise would have had without this crisis being there.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah.
Seeing no other questions, I think this concludes our questions from reporters.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to elaborate on something that Jeff said related to the different approaches by way of the different departments. Some departments, and we've seen this throughout my tenure here, which has only been 3.5 years, but we've faced budget cuts just in my short tenure over and over again because we do this annual budget exercise, and so these departments look to things like restricted funds. In this case, we're looking to redeploy some of our employees to funds that are not general fund. So there are some strategies that are being implemented that could either eliminate the need for a furlough or at least delay the need for a furlough. Some departments have that luxury and some departments don't. And I think that's what Jeff was talking about. And so when you do an approach like this that is tailor-made to each department, the results look different and the timing plays out differently. So are there employees being furloughed this week? Yes, there are. Are some departments able to use different strategies to avoid that in the immediate? Yes, they can. And so you're going to see this play out this coming week and in the following weeks, depending on how long we've got here. So I just wanted to illuminate just a little bit. But, you know, some departments have that kind of flexibility and some don't. And I think that's a struggle because we've asked them all to get to a 20% cut, assuming that's what we're going to need. Now, the other big thing out there is this federal piece of legislation. So, boy, if we could get some relief there, that would be tremendous. And so some of our effort is focused on that side of the ledger, and the other efforts are focused on the cut side of the ledger. And so you can see we're trying to constantly do this balancing act. So I just want to offer that by way of perspective. So couple things. So on Wednesday, remember we're not doing these daily, we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Wednesday we're going to have Eric Kearney from the African American Chamber and Jill Meyer from the Cincinnati Chamber talk to us about impacts to small businesses, especially in Hamilton County, and what they're seeing on the ground and what is available. We heard from HCDC particularly about SBA loans. We're going to hear about the chamber perspective come Wednesday. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hope it's a good resource for people. And the other thing that's happening today is we've got some disturbing trends playing out nationally and I think throughout the state and likely in Hamilton County related to demographics and who is being heavily impacted by the coronavirus here in our community. And so we, as you know, we asked the health commissioner to put the demographic information on his website. It's HCPH. And so he has started to do that. He's going to put numbers up this afternoon that will parse out the racial demographics in Hamilton County. Now, my warning is that they're not complete yet. His epidemiologists they have to go back and look at those that have tested positive as we've moved through this and go back and get that information. And so it's taking longer than we had hoped. I'm glad he's doing it. Some of it will be up today. We're going to work through the rest of the week without taking too much time. But remember, the epidemiologists are the ones who are tracing and trying to isolate people as we go through this. So again, a tug and pull. So we're trying to provide more resources there, but we're trying to get that information up in as robust a way as we can this week. And so look for those numbers on the Hamilton County Public Health website. And then we're going to have a broader conversation about that either by the end of this week or early next week to talk about how the community is responding to what we think we know is playing out by way of demographics in Hamilton County. That conversation's already started, and so we look forward to getting some real numbers so we can dig in a little bit on that conversation. And Bridget's got her hand up, so.
We got 2 more questions, a follow-up on that. Sherry Coolidge from the Inquirer has another question.
Bridget, can you hear? Hello? Are you paying a lot more money for their budget like job and family services? Are you having to deal with that kind of thing too in some different departments?
I didn't catch the question. I think she asked about Job and Family Services. So Job and Family Services is outside the general fund, and so it is, remember what we've talked about by way of keeping kids safe in this community and keeping seniors safe in this community. And so those employees are still doing that work. They're not working out of the Alms and Depke building right now. They're working from home, but they're also out in the field visiting these families. And so JFS is unique in that it is not impacted in the same way as departments that are under the general fund.
We have another follow-up question for you, Commissioner, from Chris Wederick with the Business Courier.
Commissioner, is there any clarity on how much you guys are getting from the CARES Act? Is it 100 million or has it been significantly reduced? And just to make sure I understand, you can't use any of that to pay any of these folks that are going to be furloughed or deal with any of these cuts. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I cannot offer clarity on the amount. Jeff, the range is huge. I'm going to let Jeff come up and talk about that in a second. But it is fair to say that, and by the way, we're really grateful for the dollars because these dollars are going to help us respond. So some of the dollars that we used to house the homeless population, some of that was the federal money, right? Some of the dollars that we're using for PPE, for purchasing large, huge quantities of PPE for our first responders, federal dollars can be used for that. And so the federal dollars have to be directly associated with our response to COVID-19. And so it is a narrow interpretation, and we cannot use those for general fund purposes. That said, we talked, I think it was Friday, about how we can redirect some of our employees. So for instance, Robert Bell, who works under the county administrator, he's our economic inclusion director, is being repurposed to another department to do what I just talked about, to do some outreach into the African American community, to make sure that we're messaging appropriately to everybody in Hamilton County about the crisis and what people need to do to avoid getting COVID-19, but also helping us understand what the interplay there is so we can do a better job of it. So with that, Jeff, I think Jeff is standing here. I think he wants to talk about the range. Yep.
I wish I knew the number. I don't know the number, but there have been public documents released by multiple trade organizations, et cetera, showing what was largely believed to be the allocation to direct allocation counties throughout the country. Hamilton County's number was listed on there as $142 million that could be deployed directly, as Commissioner Dreihaus said, to activities directly responding to COVID-19. So we have heard that there are some not so subtle differences perhaps between how the formula for determining that direct allocation has been applied by some of the trade associations and how the formula is being worked by the Department of Treasury, which is responsible for making the grant allocations. And at the end of the day, it's going to depend upon how Department of Treasury ultimately determines those allocation formulas are interpreted. I don't have any other number aside from the number that has been released previously in some of these trade publications. But again, as Commissioner Dreihaus indicated, these have to be for expenditures directly responding to COVID-19 that were not included as budgeted costs in the jurisdiction's most recently passed budget. But we are also seeing opportunities for where we could be redeploying staff or resources that might be covered. So we're hoping for some assistance there. We're just not going to know until we get the exact allocation number and until we hear the rules from Treasury as to how we can apply those dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, look, we're asking for flexibility with those dollars. if those dollars, it's a tremendous amount of money, and the range is 140, but then we've heard other numbers that have been far lower than that. That said, could be really helpful when it comes to preserving some of the workforce and the work that's being done here at the county. So we're asking our federal representatives for some flexibility with those dollars because they're already there, or additional dollars for this purpose, just like the city is asking and everybody is asking for some relief, the county is asking as well. So hope that answers the question. Thank you all for joining, and we'll be back on Wednesday. Thank you.